You're listening to the Journey Podcast. Are you ready to meet the most powerful ally in your quest for purpose and well-being? It's closer than you think. Let's explore this inner universe together in today's episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we delve into the journey of connecting with our higher self, a quest that offers profound insights into our purpose, desires, and the essence of who we are. We discuss the transformative power of tuning into our higher consciousness, highlighting practices and mindsets that can facilitate this deep internal connection. Join us as we uncover the steps to nurturing a meaningful relationship with our higher self, paving the way for a life filled with joy and peace. Dr. Katie T. Larson is a hypnotherapist and growth coach who works with highly sensitive people, empaths, and intuitives. She has helped initiate lifelong personal growth in thousands of individuals for over 20 years using proven holistic techniques from multiple disciplines. She is best known for guiding clients through quests, inner journeys that offer opportunities to explore your life from deeper perspectives, bringing more purpose, meaning, and joy. Prior to being a highly sought-after hypnotherapist, Dr. Larson has worked worldwide as a scientist, educator, and consultant for international schools, NGOs, and private institutions. She has led groups of all sizes on nearly every continent through embodied, self-reflective practices designed to foster personal transformation. Her Ph.D. in leadership and change focused on the topic of transformative learning, which she weaves into all her work at Growth Quests. In addition to being a nationally certified hypnotherapist, Dr. Larson has a depth coaching certification, transpersonal wellness coaching certification, and a coaching certification for those undergoing a spiritual emergence. She is also a quantum healing hypnosis technique and transpersonal hypnotherapist. She enjoys combining her broad scientific knowledge with an embodied spiritual wisdom to offer holistic perspectives on how to embrace the change we're all experiencing on personal and planetary levels. She's also an acclaimed performance storyteller, published author of a well-loved children's book, TEDx speaker, and workshop facilitator for international conferences, retreats, and festivals. She and her work have been featured worldwide on radio, podcasts, newspapers, and web series. When she's not helping Growth Quest clients, Dr. Larson can be found chasing her 2 kids to clean up their endless mess. Here is my interview with Dr. Katie Larson. Hi, Dr. Katie. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because connecting with the higher self is such an interesting topic for today's conversation. Welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. I don't think we've actually talked about the higher self before, so I'm very curious to dive in. Now, for starters, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you've come to do what you do?
Sure. Everyone loves to talk about this, like our origin story. I'm from the United States. I was born and raised outside of Chicago. And I am going to actually give a lot of credit to National Geographic magazines for helping shape the way that my journey turned out. My grandfather used to give me National Geographic magazines. And if you've never seen these, these are the ones of the nice yellow border and all of the photos inside of far off lands. And even though I grew up in a suburb next to a lake, those magazines turned me into someone that was like a dreamer, a seeker. Like I felt like my life was built to be a part of those magazines. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. But I always had this dream of like, I belong out in the world. And I also was always a seeker. I think a lot of the listeners on your podcast are similar. We just kind of came out wanting to be something, like we knew that there was something more to this reality, or we were really into like mysteries, or like Bigfoot or something that was anomalous. I was always really attracted to that. And something else that was really interesting that I have come to learn was not normal was I had a lot of past life memories as a kid. And so I would talk about them openly with my parents as a young person. And I would say these funny comments that they would almost like laugh at. Like I would say, "Oh, I hope I'm not an alcoholic again." And they would say, like, again, and I'm like, "Yeah, last time I was this woman and I was drinking too much." And my parents were almost like shocked that I was talking like that as a small kid. But I had like glimpses of these lives that were like more real than real. Right. So, like, those three things as a kid, like, combined to kind of make me like a little bit of a different child. But the National Geographic and my love of nature and my love of seeking, those combined into helping me become a scientist. I was actually a scientist and a science teacher. And so I was really into field biology, where I would be out in the world and I would be exploring, and if the dirtier and the like more desolate and remote places, the better. And I was a high school science teacher as my first career. So I would teach biology and physics and chemistry. And the funny thing is that in between all of these trips that I would take as a scientist in the summer, so I was going to these far off places like Mongolia and Borneo and Kenya and working with elephants and cheetahs and just all of these like, wild species. I was starting to have these memories again of living in other places. And it's like the more that I kind of tapped into that side of me that loved those National Geographic magazines as a kid, like being out in the world, the more I was out in the world, the more I was remembering things. And so those memories started coming up again. So in 2010, I had my first past life regression. And similar to the work that I do now, where you go to a hypnotherapist and you are experiencing a life and you're narrating the experience. And it took me back to a time when I was in Scotland and the 1800s, and I was a man and I had a whole life and a wife and kids, and I just saw the whole life. And afterwards, the hypnotherapist was like, "Wow, you're very visual. You should consider doing this again." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, give me some time with this." Like, I had like validated some beliefs that I had as a very young child, but I was also not ready to just take that information and run with it. So I sat on that for one full year. And for that one full year, I felt like my whole life changed. I felt like I was more aligned. I had less fear. I started to really have the courage to be my more authentic self and take some different risks. And I had no fear of death anymore. And so one year later, I did another session called Life Between Lives sessions, which again, I offer these now as a hypnotherapist. And in that session, you learn so much. You meet your higher self, which is what we'll talk about today. You learn the contracts that you have with different souls in this life. You learn what your purpose is now and in the past and in the future, because we have a lot of purposes. And you really feel more aligned to what you're meant to be doing in this incarnation as a person. And that is really what gave me my true awakening in this life. And that was in 2011. So I didn't become, a hypnotherapist immediately, actually. I went on and I did my life and I followed the trajectory that I had already set out for myself, which, was I finished being a science teacher. I went on for a master's degree and a PhD in something called transformative learning, which is the way that we change our perspectives about ourselves and the world as we learn and grow more about the world. And then I became a coach, and I love working with people as a coach because I can take what I've learned out in the world, traveling the world in all these different capacities as a scientist and a consultant and a coach. But then also I like when people realize, okay, I'm stuck, and they're in their own conscious mind and they're kind of like can't figure out why they're so stuck. In 2020, I started down the rabbit hole of hypnotherapy because I wanted to get back into the method that really changed my life. Because if I had to pinpoint the single thing that changed my life the most, it was those 2 sessions. And so in 2021, I certified as a transpersonal hypnotherapist. And transpersonal is everything that is above and beyond your personhood. So it is more energetic in nature, and it deals with things like your generational lineage or your past lives or your higher self or your inner child, things that are a lot more in the subtle body or the energetic body of who we are. And so that helps also with those unconscious blocks that my coaching clients were getting. And I have not looked back since, because hypnotherapy has been single-handedly the most successful tool that I've used in my toolkit to help people who are on their journey of awakening and understanding who they really are. So that's a little bit me in a nutshell. I was always interested in finding answers and seeking truths, and it's come in many forms. But yeah, now this is what I do. I'm a coach and I'm a hypnotherapist.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I love it. I'm just imagining you traveling
Thanks.
all over the globe and seeing all these different
Yes.
things. So, wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I love this intersection of science and a bit of spirituality or energetic work as you're discovering the different kind of lives and what is happening and what meaning that has that you're remembering those things. So that is fascinating to me because there often is this perception that one can't really coexist with the other. So it has to either be science and provable or it can't exist. So I love this intersection that the two actually work really well together and you can have both in your life.
Right.
So,
And I think like at the heart of every scientist is someone who's just a seeker,
yeah.
right? And I think that's why I never felt any kind of conflict with science and spirituality, because really we're just looking for answers. And I
Yeah.
think the funny part is most scientists, when they find an answer, they want to continue looking. And I think seekers spiritually are the same. Like once we find an answer, we want to keep looking. So we're very similar in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I imagine you've had a lot of different experiences, both real in the world as you're traveling, and then both energetic also as you're remembering things and doing journeys. So you touched a little bit on the higher self, and I'm curious, do we all have a higher self? Because some people may have never heard of that before. So what is a higher self? And is that part of us or part of an energetic body, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, I think it's a word that we use in different ways through millennia. Like perhaps we've heard it called a soul or a spirit or your subconscious. The higher self is basically, I like this metaphor a lot because I recently had a client who was really into video games. And so I was saying, if we are Mario from Mario Brothers, the higher self is player one. And so the player one is the version of us that is more energetic or ephemeral or ethereal is a better word, that is playing the human version of us. And that higher self is more wise, is able to see everything from a much higher perspective. They're also very compassionate and loving, and they're connected with us. And we maintain that connection through our intuition, or we can communicate really easily with our higher self in a trance state. And how you get to that trance state is irrelevant. You can meditate, you can be in a deep run, you can be dancing, you can use certain drugs, you can use hypnotherapy. But when we're in a very calm, relaxed trance state, you can have free access to that higher self. And really, what their job is they are almost able to see everything from a much higher perspective. They know where we're going, they know where we've been, and we can ask them for guidance when we need it. And we kind of have like an agreement with them that we've agreed to forget that they're there in order to live a full human life. But we do have an agreement that we can ask them for guidance at any point.
Oh, that is fascinating. So, the agreement that we forget, I mean, that is kind of unbelievable when we think back that we have lived possibly all these lives and we don't remember. And the other thing, we might not remember at first what our purpose here is in this life. And I think that can lead to a lot of complications for people as well if they can't align themselves or they can't really find their purpose. I find that that can cause a lot of mental, emotional, and even physical problems in people's lives. So, is it important that we find this higher self and we are able to connect to our higher self? Can that cause issues if we don't?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I know, again, going back to the client where I used the Mario Brothers example, he said, well, it feels like a cheat code. Like, I'm not sure I should be accessing the higher self. I feel like if I made an agreement to forget, like maybe I should just go with the agreement. And the problem is, I find that when the concept of when we incarnate is usually we've come down with a plan. And our plans tend to be quite ambitious when we're in the spiritual realm. Before we're born, we map out our contracts with other people. We'd say, okay, I'll teach you this, you teach me that, because we're actually just trying to grow. We've mapped out our challenges, we've mapped out our joys, and it does feel like a lot of it is mapped out. There is free will. We're always able to change that. And part of the reason that we should change it sometimes is we're quite ambitious in the spiritual realm. We think we can manage really well when we're in the human form, but we forget when we are born that it's actually much more complex and somewhat difficult in this density. And so some of us really forget. And not only do we forget our purpose, but like we get distracted while we're here. We get bogged down by some of the karma that we thought was going to be helpful for our growth. We get bogged down by a lot of like the BS that comes with being human. And why it's good to know you have a connection with the higher self and you can kind of make adjustments about your plan is because sometimes we bit off more than we can chew. And it was more than we bargained for. And you can actually tone it down. You can almost like turn down the volume, turn down the difficulty level, and you can renegotiate some of your contracts with people because it's not always about doing a life that's so difficult where you earn so many rewards, but it's about growing. And that's the name of my business, Growth Quests. We have this long life journey, and that life journey has lots of mini little journeys that are little quests. And all we're really meant to be doing is growing. It doesn't matter if it takes, one day or 10 years, as long as we're growing, that's what we're here for. And so when we're starting to feel lost and when we're starting to feel stuck, or even like we can't even predict what direction we're supposed to go, you have access to that quote unquote cheat code with your higher self. And you can ask for guidance and they'll tell you. And they will even tell you what your contracts are with people and what you set out to do before birth. And just knowing that information alone, it just reinvigorates us. It realigns us. It gets us back on a path that we feel more comfortable on and more empowered in. And it is something that we don't know enough about. But I think with enough of us waking up, like myself in my story of when I finally understood my purposes, I think the purpose is for many of us to wake up enough to remind others that we have access to this information. This is our birthright. This is just a friend, a helpful friend who is in reality us, just another version of us.
Yeah, it's kind of comforting actually to think of that we always have someone in our corner, whether we remember that right away or not. But that is a very comforting thought, actually. And how can people go about connecting with their higher self? I mean, to some listeners, this might be very new. Even the higher self might be a new concept to them. So, how can we start in connecting with our higher self? Maybe if we haven't really heard of it before, or the concept is still a bit abstract for us, how can we start on that path of connecting with the higher self?
The really great thing is a lot of us are accidentally connecting with the higher self already. And so the trick is to learn what the difference between when you are and are not accidentally connecting with the higher self, and then to do it purposefully. So the way that we know we're accidentally connecting with the higher self is it's coming through your crown chakra, or it's coming through a sense of inner knowing. It's like your intuition. It's guidance that's either coming in the form of a vision. Maybe you're clairvoyant, or maybe it's through something you can hear, you're clairaudient, or maybe you're clairsentient. It's just a knowing that you're getting. And it doesn't always make sense. In other words, it's extra rational, not irrational, but it's extra rational. It's giving you guidance and giving you advice. And it doesn't always align with like what you want, right? Like sometimes it'll be like, you should really take a left, and you take a left and you avoided an accident, right? And you're like, God, what was that? That's your higher self, right? This is your higher self who's able to see different challenges before you can and just connecting with you. So first find out, am I doing this accidentally? Like, because you do, and you'll do it a lot. You'll do it all day long, and it'll be in a different form. Everyone's is different. Mine personally comes in those three: visual, audio, and a knowing. But some of us are more strong in certain ones than others. And then once you start to realize, oh, I'm doing this accidentally, you can start to do it purposefully. And the way we do it purposefully is through trance. And through what that means is being in a very relaxed state. The trance state, there's different names like, alpha, beta, delta, theta. Theta state is a really good state to try to do this with. And theta state is that state right before you fall asleep. And so you all know that hypnagogic state in between sleep and dream, like when we're kind of like, you didn't even think you were asleep, but you were on your way, like when you kind of jolt awake. So when you go to sleep at night, you can practice in between almost falling asleep, just being so relaxed, and then trying to connect and just feeling, what does the higher self feel like? I think 80% of the time they're invisible. They're more of a sensation, a warmth, a light, a feeling of love, a feeling of compassion. But for, I think, 20% of my clients, it's a vision. I think even for myself, I can see mine sometimes almost like a fairy, a white light that was in the shape of almost like a winged creature or something like this. And you can see it. And so you just ask the question, you just try to gain, who are you, and how can you help me? And then just ask open-ended questions. What am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to do with that? So one way is in between sleep and wake, but another way is maybe you're more of a active person and you like to go for a long run or a long swim. Halfway in between a long run, you get into a theta state. And so you're not really aware of much around you and you're really focused. So you can do it when you're there, or a static dance, or maybe deep meditation. Or you can use, hypnosis tapes that you find on YouTube, or you can work with a hypnotherapist like me who can guide you into a deep trance. And that is where you're going to access all of this information, is in that realm, your inner realms in a theta state.
That's really interesting. Thank you for explaining that. And what is the difference between our higher self and intuition? Or is there a difference? Is that the same thing, or is it different?
I think it's a little of both. I think a lot of our intuition is bodily based, meaning for many of us, like I work primarily with people who are highly sensitive people. And so we are 1 in 5 of the population where our nervous systems, if a non-sensitive person has 5 tabs open in their nervous system, a highly sensitive person has 100 tabs open, meaning we're just more wired for our external stimulus. And so our body and our nervous system can sometimes pick up on things that are happening around us that are a little bit unconscious to us. Perhaps we're not really paying attention consciously, but perhaps there's like a change in temperature or a change in the mood of the room. And that will come to us in a form of intuition, but it's bodily based, meaning our nervous system is the one that's really helping us with that intuition. But I think the higher self is a guidance that, again, it's somewhat extra rational from the perspective of it's coming from external sources, like meaning it's not your thoughts. And in fact, some of the guidance that you'll feel from a higher self, it will contradict what you really want. Meaning like maybe you, as your ego state, would want to do it one way. And your higher self is, if you do it that way, it's going to cause you a lot more pain and a lot more mess. So consider doing it this way. And so it's a much more loving, compassionate, but extra rational form of guidance that doesn't always feel like it's coming from our brain or our ego state.
And how does that compare to our inner child? Is that connected to our higher self as well in some way?
A little bit. It's interesting when I was mentioning earlier about my work as a transpersonal hypnotherapist. It's like all of the things that are kind of energetically within us. The higher self is one that is within us, and the inner child is another. The higher self is kind of more expands and extends beyond and transcends beyond this life. And so it knows all of the lives that you've lived. It knows all of the stories and the histories that you've had with different souls. It's quite wise and it's quite well versed in everything. Your inner child, on the other hand, is the child state of you at different ages, but in this life. So they're there inside of you and they recall everything. And that is some of the work that I do with clients when they're feeling stuck is we access their inner child, because sometimes the stuckness is happening as a result of something that happened in your childhood that you've totally forgotten about, but is keeping you stuck. Like, for example, perhaps you're having a really hard time speaking up at work. And like you just can't, like you just freeze. Like every time you try to speak to your boss, you just freeze. And some of the work that I would do is, okay, well, let's just go back and we'll find the origin of that stuckness. And sometimes we'll find that the origin of the stuckness is, when you were 6 years old, your parents told you, no one cares what you think. And we don't remember that encounter. We barely felt like it was a memory worth investing in our conscious mind. But in our unconscious, that child is holding on to that message and it's keeping you stuck in this part of your life as an adult. And so we go in and we heal the different ages of your childhood or your teenagehood or your young adulthood, but those areas that are stuck. And that is your inner child. And it's, again, it's transpersonal. It's not necessarily something you're walking around thinking about all day and every day, but it is influencing your life. And so it's a little bit more, if the higher self, transcends space and time, the inner child is much more relevant to this life of what you've been encountering as you as a human in this life.
I'm fascinated by all these different resources that we have access to, so
Same.
we have the higher self, we have intuition, we can communicate with our inner child. These are fantastic resources for our own healing, our own alignment, finding our purpose, and actually living in a more healthy and joyful way in this life. So
Yeah,
I am fascinated by that. And, if you apply all of these things in your life and you access these resources, what have you personally noticed has changed in your life since you have started working with these resources?
I like that question because it's like, that's why I do what I do, right? Is that I talk how I walk, right? I find for me personally, like I mentioned in my origin story, just knowing that this is kind of a game is really helpful for me, meaning I'm so much less afraid. I think losing fear alone helps me and my clients. Like just knowing you've been here before, you're going to do it again, like you decided this life. And so why did you decide that life? Because that becomes the new question of why would I give myself this challenge? And once we look at it from that perspective, like we're more brave. So for me, as you heard from my origin story, I just took a lot of risks. Like I took so many risks and I still take risks because what's the worst that can happen? Right. And I think it was a lot easier before I had children because now I have, two little souls that I need to take care of and not take things too risky. But prior to children, I took a lot more risks because I felt like that was my goal in life, is to experience as much as possible and kind of get myself out of these hairy situations. And, it's like a video game of like, oh, I'm in the next level. I also find I don't worry so much about the future. So A, I don't worry about dying, which I think is huge. And B, I don't worry so much about the future because I find when I get these glimpses from my higher self of how things will turn out, again, they're not always great. Like they're not always going to be like, oh, everything's going to be fine. But it's like, okay, this is a potential challenge up ahead. But the reason that you're wanting this challenge, Katie, is because you are very impatient. So we're going to throw you a patience challenge your way. And so you start to take it lightly. Instead of taking things so seriously, I think I've been a lot more humorous and a lot quicker to accept the challenge, like challenge accepted, let's do this. And I think my higher self, and I think what's fun for me working as a hypnotherapist, I get to see the personality types of other people's higher selves, and they're all very different, which is hilarious. But my higher self has a very good sense of humor. And I do as well, but my higher self is hilarious. And so like she really pushes me to like see the humor in things. Other people's higher selves are like very compassionate and loving. Some are like direct and serious. And what's interesting is like it doesn't always match their like human personality. Like I had a guy that was very, hard and, very competitive. And, you would never guess that his higher self is like a sweet, sweet soul that just wanted to like hold him and tell him everything was going to be okay. And it doesn't always match up. And then some people, they're very like easygoing and a little bit more soft spoken, but their higher self is like, she needs to listen up more. Like they're very direct, like, oh, we're trying to get your attention. And they're just like the opposite of their personality. And so what's always fun is when you listen to it, it tends to tell you exactly what you need and exactly how you need to hear it. And we're all different that way. And so I think I've just become more open to receiving guidance when I need it.
And even the thought of, working with that anxiety that a lot of us have about the future and always worrying what might come. And with the fear of death or fear in general, I think even being able to kind of relegate those emotions a little bit more to the back, I think that would make a huge difference in many, many people's lives to have just more access to the things that they can actually experience here without all of that fear and worry. So yeah, this is a great approach.
There's a lot less worry. There's a lot less worry with this work. And I think it just, once you realize, oh, I can purposely tap into this, you use it a lot more. And you don't have any shame about using a quote unquote cheat code in your video game. You use what you got.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way that's what it's there for as well, right? So that we can be a little bit more invested and benefit a little bit more of what we're doing here. So yeah, that is fascinating. Now you work with clients. So do you want to let us know a little bit about your programs and your services so that listeners can get an idea of how they could work with you and what kind of things they could work with you on?
Absolutely. So you heard a little bit more about, I said the phrase highly sensitive people. I said we're 1 in 5. So I work primarily with highly sensitive people, empaths and intuitives. So these are the folks who feel the world very deeply. They feel others very deeply, and they already have a connection to something as an intuitive. And if you're not one of those, I still work with you, but I find that those are the clients that I vibe with the best because I myself am all 3 of those. And so I work with these folks consciously on a conscious level through coaching. And so sometimes I do coaching that is, high sensitivity 101 when you're first realizing, oh my gosh, I'm highly sensitive, because we all have that moment as an adult of like, this is a thing. Yes, this is a thing. And so that is one of the sessions that I do. I do a session that helps people who are undergoing an awakening. I know that's something close to your heart of like when you're going through a spiritual awakening or all of these things are starting to come to the forefront, it can be very disorienting. And so to have someone that's gone through it themselves, but also has literal Ph.D. in the process is very helpful. So I have an awakening coaching session. If you're in person with me in St. Petersburg, I do walk and talk sessions where we walk for 90 minutes in the forest and we talk through a lot of things going on. And I work with nervous system reset. So again, through coaching, a lot of us as highly sensitive people, because our nervous systems are quite active, they have the more tendency to get dysregulated. And so I work with folks on helping regulate their nervous systems. And those are what I work with in the conscious level. And then on the unconscious level, as a hypnotherapist, I'm also a quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner, which is the work of the late, great Dolores Cannon. I won't talk too much about her, but you can give her a Google if you don't know her. She's an absolute superstar. And so I'm trained in her work, and I help people to access their higher self through her work, but more so, I use it in my own work as a transpersonal hypnotherapist, where we do a session where we get to know your higher self. Who are they? What are they like? What are the questions we have for them? I work with inner child healing, like you mentioned. I also do generational lineage healing because we have a lot of trauma that we're carrying that isn't even ours. It's like great great grandma's, but it still shows up in our life. I do past life regression, life between life sessions, and a lot of other sessions that are just the energetic body that wants to be explored and understood. So I work one-on-one with people always, and I always work internationally online through video calls.
Sounds amazing. And we will be linking to all of Dr. Katie's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can connect with her, find out more about her work. And if you're inspired by this episode, also how you can work together with her on some of the things that might have come up for you during this episode. And I am, as always, very curious to find out how you perceive what we talked about in this episode and how working with Dr. Katie would impact you and your life. Well, this has been an incredible episode, and I really hope our listeners have enjoyed the journey into connecting with the higher self as much as I have. It has been fantastic chatting with you on the podcast today, Dr. Katie, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your wisdom with us.
Petra, it's been my honor. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure is all mine. And thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge about the higher self, and take really great care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejourney.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.